Hi and welcome back. In this video, we're looking at class method and static method decorators. We've looked at how we can define classes and methods, and including some special methods like dunder init and dunder len. And all these methods had something in common, which is the self parameter at the start. As a reminder, I've written here some code, which is the student class that we've already seen. We've got self and self. Remember, we can call this parameter whatever we want, but the convention in Python is to call it self. The most important thing about this parameter is the value that it points to, the value that it represents, which is the object. When we create a new object from this student class, and we call any of its methods, we are automatically passing in the self parameter, and we've seen that. Let me just paste some code in here, which creates a new student, Rolf, and it appends a couple of marks to him, and then prints out the average function. Remember, what this is doing is just doing student.average and passing in Rolf. So we're accessing the average method of the student class, and we're passing Rolf in as the first argument. Rolf.average does the same thing, only Python does this for us in the background. So when we do object.method, that really is doing class.method and then passing the object in there. And this knowledge lets us do some pretty weird stuff. I don't recommend you do this, as it's going to break things, but we could do something like student.average hello, passing in a string. Obviously, this is not going to work because the average method here expects an object that has a marks property. A string does not have a marks property, so when we run this, it's going to tell us that a string doesn't have an attribute marks. See? But nonetheless, you can do this because self can be anything you want. As I said earlier, the important thing is the value that self represents, which should be an object of type student, so that it has these name, school, and marks properties. Just remember that self is a parameter like any other, and you can give it any value you want. However, doing hello.marks is not going to work, because the string doesn't have that property. Anyway, so why is this important? This first type of method we've looked at is commonly called an instance method. It's one that takes the caller object as the first argument, and that's self. So the caller here is Rolf. When we call the average, it takes in Rolf as the first argument. This is called an instance method. There are two more types of method. One that takes the caller's class as the first argument, and one that takes nothing as the first argument. So, instance method takes the object, that's Rolf, as the first argument. Then we've got another type which takes the class, that's student, as the first argument. And there's one that takes nothing as the first argument. Let's have a look at one that takes the caller's class as the first argument. We're going to define a new class here, and I'm just going to show you the syntax, and in the next video we're going to look at some examples, okay? So these examples are going to be pretty terrible. We're going to define a class which we're going to call foo, and in it we're going to have an @class method that is hi. Okay, so notice, by the way, I've not really said this before, but you do not need an init method on every class. You can just ignore it, and then you just won't define any properties to begin with. That's totally fine. You don't need one. So we've got this @class method decorator, and we know it's a decorator because it has the @ symbol in front. And now I've renamed the first argument to be CLS instead of self. That's just to tell me that this is a class method, and that this parameter is going to hold the value of the class that it was called with. So that's foo. Let's print cls.__name_. Okay. Then I am going to create an object of type foo, and I'm going to say my object.hi. Now, important, what's happening in the background is that not my object is not getting passed as the first argument. Now the object's class is getting passed as the first argument. So what do you think we're going to see printed out here? I hope you got that right. what we'll see is foo. So let's run that. And as you can see, what we see printed out here is foo. That's because cls.__name__ gives us the name of the class, and cls is the class, so that's foo. Now, terrible example, I just wanted to show you the syntax. And again, cls is just a name for the parameter. You can call it whatever you want. If you want it to be really quite silly, you could call it self. Terrible idea. Don't do that, because then it's just going to confuse you, okay? This is not self. This is not the object that you're currently dealing with. CLS is the convention because it stands for class. Just call it that. I think that's a better idea. Now, another example. We could, instead of @class method, define class bar that's going to have a static method. And this static method takes no parameters. Notice that there's nothing inside there, and it just prints something. Hello, I don't take parameters. I don't take parameters. I just have this really bad habit of calling parameters arguments and vice versa. Don't fall into that bad habit. Just call them parameters when they're here, arguments when they are here. That's the correct naming. Now, we can say another object is bar, and we can say another object dot high. And we can run this. And now you see that it says, hello, I don't take parameters. So that's good. These pieces of syntax are just so that you can modify what the method takes in. How you use them is totally up to you. So, frequently, the class methods are going to be used when you want something that wants to have access to the class. And static methods are going to be used when you want a method here that doesn't use the current object or the class, but it's somehow related to the class. In the next video, we're going to look at a couple examples. So just remember this syntax for now. And now in the next video, we're going to look at some examples, and throughout the course, we're going to be using this quite a few times. So don't worry if it doesn't fully click. Just wanted to show you what it looks like. Now, let's move on to the next video. I'll see you there.